Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Kimberly Cloud Show. I am your host, Kimberly Cloud. Today, I got a very special guest for the show, Beyond Special, and I want to thank him for joining my show. Can you go ahead and announce to the world who you are and where you're calling from?
My name is David Kent. I'm a psychiatrist practicing in the Boise, Idaho area. I live in Eagle, which is right next door to Boise. So that's kind of where I hail from. I've been here since 1990.
Tell me about your journey from 1990 when I was, wow, 6 years old to now. Wow.
Well, I moved here to start a practice. I'm from the Midwest originally, so I came from Iowa. But I really like the Intermountain West. I like the climate and the mountains and all the recreational activities. And I had family and kids, so felt like it was a great place to raise a family. So that's initially the attraction. And being in medicine,
Did
you can
you
kind of pick where you
did
live.
you research like the Eagle area to know that this is like a family net area type thing? Or did you just go on basic hearsay?
Well, back then, Eagle was very small. So we actually moved to West Boise for 4 years. And then we were in a position where we wanted to upgrade our house because we had a pretty big family. And we actually were going to build a house. And then my wife happened to be driving down Eagle Road and someone was pounding a sign in the ground down a street that we loved. And she went down there and it was the house that we loved. So
Mhm.
we went on a contract with building that house. We never really broke ground, so we didn't really have any bad issues there. And we ended up buying this other house and we lived there for 27 years, raised our 5 children there. It was on a few acres, a beautiful place to raise a family. So Eagle's near and dear to our heart. We really love it here. Now we're living in a downsized house, but we wished we were back on that property because it was special. It was really very special property.
Did you
But
leave anything behind, like a capsule or anything that you can possibly from now go years from now go back and say, even though I left that house, I remember that house. Do y'all drive by that house? Like, how does it work?
oh, my wife used to drive by there almost every day in the past, and she drives by. She drove by the other day. I held off driving by there for a long time because I just couldn't bear to look at it and it not be mine. We left some stuff behind, but I'm not sure I should say what they were. Buried in the ground. Just suffice it to say, we did have a lot of pets.
Oh,
So we did leave
understood.
some things behind, but no capsule or time capsule or anything like that. But
Can
it was
you
very
tell?
interesting property because the owners before us, there's a creek that ran through the property, and they would sometimes find old Indian arrowheads in the creek that ran through the property. So it has a lot of history. What's
You,
that?
you used to find what in the creek?
Well, the people who owned the house before us said they used to find Indian arrowheads in the creek.
God, that's history.
That's
Wow.
history. Yeah, we go out to Jordan Valley with some of my daughter's her boyfriend's property out there, and they have old. You can see where the teepees used to be, and we always find fragments of Indian arrowheads every time we go out there. It's pretty cool to pick up a piece of history from the ground because you don't really know how old it is. It could be 100 years old, it could be 2,000 years old. We just don't know. But you're picking it up and you're going, okay, there's a history to this piece of flint or stone or whatever they did. And there's lots of them out there. So it's really cool.
And I'm glad you left this part of you on this film. Tell me about everything you've accomplished as a psychiatrist and what it is you do and why you do it.
So I get to brag about myself. Uh-oh, that's kind of scary. Well, to just tell you the nuts and bolts of it, psychiatrists, some people confuse that with psychology and other things. And psychiatrist is really just a medical specialty. So you have to do college, 4 years of medical school, then 4 years of psychiatry residency. It's kind of like, and to put it in perspective, a family practice residency is 3 years. So it's a year longer than a family doctor goes to school. If you become a child psychiatrist, it's 5 years. And there's other subspecialties, but those are the main things. So it's pretty rigorous. It's basically, for me, it was 12 years after high school of going back to school and getting my degree. It's rigorous. You have to kind of compete to get in, and you have to get the grades, and you have to take all the exams all the way through. And then at the end of that, they let you take a 3-day exam to get your boards. And then after that, you got to get 2 separate boards to get your certification to be a certified psychiatrist, board certified. So it's a long process, but I had thank you. I had a really good advice back when I was in high school. The reason I got into medicine in the first place was I just happened to be lucky enough to know a world famous heart surgeon, and when I was 16 years old, he allowed me to scrub in and stand by the table and watch open heart surgery. I did that on 2 occasions. That's what inspired me to go into medicine in the first place. But cardiovascular surgery is an incredible, long, tough, demanding journey where you have to do after medical school 5 years of general surgery, then 7 years of cardiovascular surgery on top of that. That's after medical school and after all that. Tremendous, and then it's hard to get in, you have long hours, very, very demanding. And his name was Don.
So,
I'm sorry.
did they only learn about myocardial infarction and all of those 10 years? Because that's the only thing I
Well, you learn
know.
about that in medical school real fast. That's pretty much ABCs of medicine. But I asked him one day, I said, how did you do it? I mean, how did you get through all of that long thing? And he had a wife, and then he basically had 2 sons. One of his sons actually went on to become a cardiovascular surgeon himself. The other one became an attorney. But I asked him one day, I said, how did you do it? I mean, mine's tough enough. He said to me, David, you've got to do something every day. Do something you love. And that I've always kind of lived by that mantra now. I've told that to my kids, you got to do something every day. Whatever you choose, you're going to have to do it for 30 or 40 years probably. Hope you love it. And that's really kind of the take home I took. And so my journey was more out of love and more out of enjoyment and passion than it was this long, arduous journey. I tried to embrace every step of the way. And University of Iowa is where I went to medical school. It's highly rated state school, one of the higher rated state schools. At the time, it was the largest teaching hospital in the United States. So it had a real broad exposure to different rare conditions as well as normal conditions. You rotated through these subspecialties, and then my residency I stayed there because they had, I think, the top residency in the country at the time. They had some very well-known professors on our faculty that got many awards. And I just happened to be there and just happened to choose that school. I did interview other places and I just couldn't go anywhere else. So I just felt kind
Go
of
ahead and
lucky.
name the school again.
The University of Iowa, and then they had a residency program, a psychiatry residency program that I went to. George Winokur was the department head at the time, and he was a real innovator. He was a very rigorous scientist. He had high standards, and he hired really top researchers to come to there, and he didn't just take anybody. Nancy Andreessen was an example. She was on faculty. She had a PhD in English, and she was a psychiatrist, so she was an MD. She did seminal work on schizophrenia. If you've ever heard of positive and negative symptoms, that's
Mhm.
because of her work. She actually identified those things. That's Nancy. She later went on to get the American Scientist Award from Bill Clinton, which is the highest award you can get in medicine. I did research with her when I was a senior in medical school on schizophrenia. I went to many lectures. She ended up writing some famous books. She was amazing. But I had other professors who just equally as published and that were also great mentors. They were also good clinicians, and that sometimes isn't the case when you have a researcher. They're more research devoted and they don't have enough experience seeing actual patients, that they're not too balanced. But in Iowa, they had to do both. So I felt like I got best of both worlds. I got this clinical training. I got a lot of research exposure from top-notch researchers, Don Black, Bill Coriel, George Winokur, and Nancy Andreessen, just to cite a few of them. I'm still close to Don Black. He's written over 7 books and published 450 scholarly articles. He's been a great example for me. So I just felt really lucky to fall into that. And then when I got into practice, I had that foundation going into a private practice where I started just seeing basically exclusively patients. I've contributed some data along the way to some research projects and got my name published in some of those. I did some publishing in my residency with the help of my great professors. I couldn't have done it without them. So I've got all that experience, but I've also tried to work in different settings. When I was a resident at Iowa, I moonlighted at the state hospital for 3 years, 1 weekend a month. It was 3 nights every month. and I ran the entire state hospital by myself. So you kind of sink or swim kind of situation, and you see the sickest of the sick, and you really have to kind of pivot on your feet really well. Um, I've worked at our prison system here for a year part-time, seeing death row inmates. I've always had an outpatient practice. I've always done inpatient work, which is pretty high volume and high intensity. So I think what I'm trying to say is I've seen a lot of people. And the advantage of a psychiatrist over just about anybody else is it's a confidential setting. It's as confidential as going to a lawyer's office. And so people can and will tell you anything and everything about themselves. And very few people have that privilege. So it's given me insights and about myself, about the world, about people that I never would have had any other way. So I just feel super lucky to have done all this and done this. And that's kind of why I wrote this book that we're talking about today. I felt like I didn't want to just retire or pass away, and I didn't leave a legacy behind of all my kind of that knowledge all distilled into one place.
Mhm.
So that's why, and there wasn't a book like that out there written by a psychiatrist. You see lots of self-help books and all kinds of books, just not written by a psychiatrist who does this sort of thing. So
What
that's
make that book stands out? And another question, this is like a second question to that. You did, I seen you did electric shock therapy. You were in control of that. And then they did transcranial something. Tell me the difference between those two at the end of the first question I asked you.
okay. Well, electroconvulsive therapy or ECT has been around forever. It was
Mhm.
actually discovered in the 1930s, 1940s, really developed in the 60s, 70s, and 80s to what it is today. It's evolved a little bit since then, but not a whole lot. It's still the same idea. It's where you use electricity to stimulate the brain to have a grand mal seizure. But it's all done under anesthesia. There's muscle blockers, so it's pretty uneventful. It's safe. It's
Mhm.
mainly a treatment for severe depression where people can't respond to anything else, and usually reserved for people that are really suicidally depressed, where you just have to get them out. So
Is
I've
it
been doing.
worth it? If you on a scale from 1 to 100, how successful do you see these patients? Because I'm not gonna lie, I did electroshock therapy, so I know it helps.
Yeah, it's there's numbers behind all of this. The numbers that are published are between 60 to 80% of people with clinical depression will respond to ECT, but
Mhm,
sometimes you mix in other types of patients in their bipolar or schizoaffective disorder, which muddies the water. But if you separate it out, the depressed side of things is pretty powerful. We consider it a big gun. It has its pros and cons. It when it works, it's great, but it doesn't stay working forever. So people have to either get on meds or something to try to keep them from sliding back in their depression. And there can be an accumulative effect of some short-term memory loss if you go too long. So you always have to be mindful of that. But it is safe, from a medical standpoint. It has its place. I still cover ECT. I set up an ECT service here in Boise because I have a lot of experience at Iowa. They had an ECT center, so I have extensive experience with it. Um, then the other part of it's that TMS you brought up, and it's no joke that most people have never heard of it. It's like it's a new
mhm,
concept to you. It's like, well, what's this TMS thing? It,
mhm,
it suffers from an awareness problem.
mhm,
TMS stands for transcranial magnetic stimulation,
mhm,
which means that it uses an electromagnetic device that targets a specific circuit in the brain and stimulates it through the skull.
mhm,
It was discovered in the mid 1980s in London, England, by Anthony Barker and Mark George. They developed the technology. They demonstrated in 1993 through a published paper that it was more powerful than placebo. And then the world took notice. And now it's the most well-researched treatment of maybe of all time in psychiatry and maybe in all of medicine. It's had tens of thousands of papers devoted to it worldwide. So it's no longer experimental. It's no longer like, how does this work? We know exactly how it works. And it's very powerful. And it's also has zero long-term side effects, zero. So it's the safest treatment. And when it works, because it works through the principle of neuroplasticity, it can have a long-term benefit where patients can stay well for months or even years or even indefinitely without relapsing anymore. And they can get off their meds with it. So it's a really powerful treatment. I've become a TMS expert. I've been doing it for about 11 years now. So I've done hundreds of patients. I've met the world experts, gone to world conferences, so I have a lot of experience with it. I know exactly where it's used. It's mainly for depression, but now it has an indication for OCD, and Brainsway coming out of Israel has got an indication through the FDA for smoking cessation. So it
Wow.
may dovetail into other addictions possibly. There's lots of experimental things that are being done with it. I've had, not FDA approved, what they call off-label experience treating PTSD very successfully with it. So it has other potential uses and fringe uses, but I mainly use it for depression and OCD mostly, but every once in a while I'll treat someone with PTSD, and I've had some quite good results. Not with every single patient, but I've had some hardcore PTSD patients almost completely lose their PTSD altogether.
What
So
about
it
the treatments? Like, is there like 4 treatments, 6 treatments? Is this over the counter where you can buy the equipment? Because
Mhm.
I've seen some things online a little bit, but I don't know everything. And is this technology or a medicine? Is it connecting to the neurons? We kind of said that.
Those are great questions. All of those are great questions. The average person would think all those things. Um, it's used an electromagnetic device, and the device, there's two kinds in the world. There's what they call the figure-8 coil, which is the original discovery. Technically, they're not patented, so anybody could technically build one and use it, but it is using a high amount of electromagnetic energy. It's not something you do at home. Then there's a second device from Brainsway where they don't use the figure-8 coil, and it is patented, so only Brainsway can sell it. That machine alone costs over $200,000 for one machine. So you could try to use it at home, but you won't be able to put it on properly. And you need to have a tech watching you while you get treatment. So you don't do it from home. I know there's people who try to develop things like that, and there's some things on the market where they use some sort of stimulation, but because there's so much electromagnetic power associated with TMS, I can't imagine these wearables that you take home have anything. I just can't believe they're much better than placebo.
Is there a
Because
new technology other than TMS or electric shock therapy that's on its way? What is the newer technology? Because this came out in the 80s and the 1960s. So it's always the new thing that they're experimenting with. And with TMS, it's like they probably use different frequencies of electromagnetic to try to see how they can fine tune schizophrenia possibly in the future. So do you know of anything?
well, TMS itself is still hotly researched. It's not like we've hit our limit now. Now we know all we need to know. There's Brainsway is doing what they call rotational TMS, which hits even better the target more reliably. I haven't heard lately where that stands. They're constantly looking at different locations, different frequencies. Like there's this Saint protocol out of Stanford that hit the news a few years ago and just was all the rage. Still a great protocol, but it's not practical in a clinical setting because insurances won't cover it. But there's all these types of things going on. There's some very sophisticated minds working on it. So I think that the TMS story is not over with, and I think they're going to continue to develop more effective treatments. But it's effective about 80% of the time for depression. That's nothing to. It's not a slouch. And when it works, you get this long-term benefit. So it's a really viable treatment. But to answer your question, well, how can you do it? Well, it's usually 20 minutes a day, 5 days a week, and you do 36 treatments. So it does take about a 6 to 7 week commitment. But in my experience, people can still go to work, get time off, go to before work or go after work. They can work around a ton of things. So it doesn't really interfere with daily life. You don't have to have someone drive you there. You can drive yourself there and back. Basically, you take an hour of your day for 5 days a week is what you do. But if you have the kind of depressions that we treat for it, I've had people come from out of state to come to see me and get treated. That's how desperate they are. So driving, for an hour that day to take an hour of their day out is nothing to get better.
Exactly. How do you feel like this TMS treatment for the future may advance? Because you got to think about it. People are actually, based on what you said, people are actually getting off of medication. And then you got places and people like Elon Musk that has the Neuralink. So now I'm starting to see a picture. We're starting to push more towards more technology, homeopathic or more technology ways to fine tune our brain versus always feeding drugs, a magic pill. Do you agree?
I would agree with that because, I mean, I think we're still going to keep looking at the drugs and pharmacology. I don't think that's going away. And there are certain conditions that really only medicines are helping us right now. Bipolar patients can't become med-free. Schizophrenics can't become med-free. Even OCD don't tend to become completely med-free. Depression with the stimulation techniques have an opportunity to become med-free. So it depends. I do see that there's an enormous amount of research happening. So I never want to second guess what the next discovery is going to be, or even TMS itself. There's tens of thousands of papers coming out a year. And so you never know what breakthroughs they're going to have. One of the things that's coming out of the brain stimulation research is that the brain consists of what we call circuits, where it's kind of like electrical circuit with a beginning and an end, and it goes in a loop. Like when we do TMS, we treat the surface of the brain in specific targeted areas, but those areas are attached to deeper structures like the limbic system. So we're actually stimulating the limbic system via these circuits, and we can actually make the circuit stronger with the stimulation. They've identified at least 17 circuits in the brain, but we probably know there's more. And what do they mean? And how do they work together? Should we stimulate more than one circuit at a time? There's just always, when you find a discovery, then there's another 100 questions that go with that discovery. That's just how science moves along, 2 steps forward and 1 backwards. But I very optimistic because of the sophistication of tools we have now, that we have these great imaging devices to image the brain in different ways, very sophisticated tools to see the brain in real time, like what's going on metabolically right now, what's going on with these circuits right now. And so I see just more and more advancements, and I do think the future is really bright. And then there's the whole genetic side of things. We know that a lot of these mental illnesses have a genetic component. If that's the case, we're starting to use CRISPR technology and other things to alter people's genes in a way that maybe we can cure them from certain illnesses, possibly. So I don't think that we've hit a dead end, or we've hit a place where we just can't move forward anymore. It feels that way sometimes when things aren't happening quickly, but behind the scenes, they're happening all the time. So I do feel like there's a lot of positive things happening. And as we identify the genome and where these sites are and get it more narrowed down, where we can actually identify maybe a flaw that could be possibly fixed, well, that kind of is exciting. So I
Yeah.
think that there's a lot of things that could happen.
What you're telling me is that in the brain that there's like dead spots or weak spots, like, where certain people such as schizophrenics or bipolar, that you say needs to be on medication, they're weak in certain spots, but then you have to think of their biopsychosocial history. Were they on drugs? Are they still on drugs? What food are they intaking? What is their history? And you're right, they do have weak spots. I don't know much as you. I'm not trying definitely. However, I'm saying based on what
But
you
you're
told
speaking as
me.
a layperson, and that's perfectly okay. It's perfectly okay to ask these questions and wonder and about how it works. My book kind of talks a little bit about this. My book isn't just about meds and biological intervention. It talks about different kinds of psychotherapies, talks about family support interventions, talks about good health habits and sleep hygiene and eating right and proper exercise. It doesn't go about these alternatives as these are the cures for this, but these are the things that can help someone get a little bit better results and live a little healthier life. In the book, I always try to show how someone can go from point A over to point B and how they can get there. Point
Mhm.
A is where they're not being treated, they're not doing well, their life is falling apart. Point B is where they've gotten the help they need, the family's there for them, they're starting to take the proper treatment, whether it's brain stimulation or medications or both. But then once that all happens, then there's things to pick up, there's pieces to pick up. I mean, they've had bad habits along the way, they just haven't felt like doing anything. I don't wanna go exercise, I don't wanna eat right, I don't care. But once they start to care, then you can start to get those things in place. That's kinda how that part fits in. There's so many things. The book covers all those types of little details. And another thing I want to talk about is how much words matter to people. And let me give you an illustration. And I won't go, this is a little on the personal side, but I won't give too many details. 2 people in my family, both with the same condition, schizoaffective disorder. I won't say who they are or anything. Both started showing symptoms at the same time. And right in front of my own eyes. And being the psychiatrist that I am, I recognized it. And I said, you both need to get on meds and get treated and get stabilized. And at birth, both of them started going that direction. I'll just say person number 1 had good insight, took meds from the millisecond I said to. I didn't prescribe them, and has done well ever since. And has 2 kids, a wife. He's a great music producer. He's fantastic, does everything. Is he perfect? No. But his life is so much better than it could have been. Number 2 went to his peer group, and they said to him, no, that's not right. You don't have that. And because the peer group is so powerful, did not get on treatment, did not get on medications in a timely way. And from then on was fighting the whole idea that he even needed anything. Ended up being hospitalized 7 times psychiatrically. Ended up later having a massive stroke, and now he's passed away. So words matter. When you have someone in front of you, they matter because they influence what you may or may not do about it. We care about what people think about us and what they say. So it might have been well-meaning that his friend said these things, but they end up being very, very detrimental with a terrible outcome. And so kind of the take-home message is be careful what you say to your loved ones, your children or your family or your sisters or brothers or your parents. It has to be sort of loving and support. It's okay to point out that maybe things aren't going well or things aren't doing well, and I'm concerned. That's far different than, well, just do this, just do that like I do, and you'll be better. Then all of a sudden you feel bad because, well, I tried those things and I don't get better. I must be weak or I must not be doing it right. So again, those are simple things. You have somebody who's trying to help you, but they're not. They're actually hurting you because they're making you feel bad that you're not doing enough. So that's where professionals come in, good professionals. They're not all equal. Getting good professional help, getting on the right track, being open-minded, having insight. The book I've written allows people to have insight into these different conditions. I wrote about the conditions that we see about 99% of the time in our practices. These are the things that we treat. These are the things that are common. These are the things we can generally help. Not about sort of these obscure, weird things that you might see out there or hear about. Those don't come to the attention of a psychiatrist, really. So I wrote about the things that we see and stuff that we can help and how they can be helped. And so I talk about the language in there about families and what they could say differently to their loved ones that would actually make a difference versus what they probably shouldn't say that would make things more detrimental, if that makes sense.
Well said. On a spiritual level, based on your almost 40 or 40 plus years of psychiatry, when you hear these clients of yours, these patients of yours say, Doc, I hear voices and it's a pattern. And on a spiritual level, you like, we learned this in school. However, there must be something spiritual if Susie is doing the same thing that Christy is doing by saying they hear voices or they have grandiose ideations. Have you ever said to yourself spiritually, I can't find a reason why so many people are connected with the same narrative? That is something that's very amazing. Symptoms, hearing voices and stuff, auditory, but this a group of clients, patients, they hear and see certain things, and it's like a pattern, and it's like, what is the relevance? Do you feel that way sometimes?
Well, my job is to try to find out what's not normal, what sticks out as abnormal. Um, and sometimes you have to separate the two out. There's what's a normal belief systems, your own culture, different religions have different belief systems and what they think is real or not real. As long as it's within the realm of what's normal for that culture, you don't really necessarily think they need to be treated. It's when it sticks out. Hearing voices is typically abnormal, unless there's some sort of spiritual retreat where everyone's taking peyote or something. But in general, that's abnormal. Grandiosity is generally abnormal and usually indicates some kind of manic episode or manic type phase. It's really important to be objective when you're a physician. It's not about judgment. It's not about your belief system. It's not about what you think or don't think. The minute you start doing that sort of thing, you get into trouble because you will miss something super important and not get them on the right treatment, because they'll change their tune when they get treated. The grandiosity will go away, the voices will go away, hopefully. And all of a sudden, I don't know why I was thinking that way. That's just the way it happened at that time. Well, that's because you were in a psychosis. And there's different reasons for people to be in a psychosis. Bipolar sometimes, schizoaffective, yes, schizophrenia, absolutely. And of course, various substances can cause it. But it's a different kind of substance-induced psychosis is usually slightly different in character. Often there's visual hallucinations, which you don't typically see with schizophrenia. So there's ways to sort these things out, and that's what the history comes into. But I have to remain incredibly objective and try not to be swayed too much about the belief system, unless it's actually part of that culture of that belief system, and maybe that's just normal. But usually when they're hearing voices, that is not normal, if
Do
that
it
makes sense.
actually, yes, sir, doctor. Do it actually go into genetics, like you said, or um, like your code, your actual helix, your double helix, or your DNA, should I say? Do it actually, is it embedded in that? The actual, like if you have a baby, it's set by 50-50 that your baby may be schizophrenic like you, or is this a warrant for like a it's over for the schizophrenic, or are they finding new advancements for schizophrenia? Because it just seems like it's like if you're schizophrenic or bipolar, it's like you're never going to get right. However, there should be some advancements, right?
I think so. I mean, I think that the point is that these are some, like bipolar especially, is quite genetic, 50 to 70% risk if your parent has it. So it's really high. And you could have the perfect circumstances of loving parents, best schools, everyone's there to meet your needs and connect to you emotionally. And, you're not spoiled, but you're also you're not abused. You could have the perfect setting and still become bipolar. That's the thing. It's not environmental per se. It doesn't mean that, it can be brought out earlier because of abuse and things like that. It could be. But in general, it's sort of like a ticking time bomb. And what we see is most people that are bipolar don't start showing full symptoms until late teens, early 20s, because the brain isn't fully matured yet. And a critical area of the brain that hasn't matured yet is the prefrontal cortex, which we kind of call the brakes of people's impulsivity.
Mhm.
And so when that's really fully matures, that's when we start to see full symptoms and the full, like their first episode, their first break. And so my hope is that we will have better genetic answers moving over the next 5 to 10 years. We can map the entire genome now. We can start having big data. We'll look at large populations of people that have, we'll look at the people in that population that are bipolar versus the ones that are not, and start to look at what are the genetic differences between this group versus this group. And maybe we can see a consistent pattern. And if that's the case, maybe we have a chance to catch babies or young children, find out the genetic makeup. Is there a way to do CRISPR technology or something like that to repopulate their DNA in such a way that we get rid of that defective gene?
That's
So
y'all. That's what y'all said. I was just about to say extract that gene. I was like, I don't get it. Like it just it's unnecessary. It's unnecessary an emotion that is just not even needed in this world, you know?
I personally think it's coming. I just know that the technology is advancing at such a rate. AI has sped things up too, because we can look at huge amounts of data and we can start to get a better picture of what's going on. So I think this future is exciting. Sometimes it doesn't come fast enough, especially if we're all struggling and suffering out there. But I do think that we have a future as long as we don't blow ourselves up or do something terrible. As long as we can get out of the way of science and let it do its job and fund it properly. And it's for all of us. It's not just for these fringe cases that we fund science, it's for all of us. Mental illness affects all of us. I don't care if you have it or don't have it. It affects society, affects the prison system, the homelessness, resources. We're all
What do
affected in
you
some way.
what pattern did you see in the prison system with mental health?
Well, you see a real mix of people in there. You do see a high amount of what we call antisocial personality, or we often refer to as sociopathy, because
What
they
is that?
can't really. That's what antisocial personality is. Somebody who has a lot of aberrant behavior, criminal behavior. When they grow up, they might be the bullies. They might be the person who's breaking into stores and shoplifting and doing burglary at an early age, and they have absolutely no remorse. They don't care if a family member was killed in front of them. They would just say, "Would you get this mess out of here? I don't want it in front of me." That's the level of empathy they don't have. It's like it's a personality disorder, so it's like hardwired in their DNA. And so you see a lot of that in prison because they can't really survive in society for very long because they'll just get into trouble. So you see a lot of that in prison for sure. But you also see quite a bit of mental illness. Unfortunately, especially in Idaho, the jailing of the mentally ill has been all too common a problem where we just kind of sweep them in there, and they don't get the right treatment, and it's hard for them to get out. They get into trouble not for any fault of their own, like schizophrenia. You see bipolar, you see a lot of, you see quite a bit of that in there. And of course, substance use problems, because that often is the reason they're in jail in the first place, is because of possession charges or dealing or whatever. So,
Do
and,
they ever
and
tell you do they ever tell you why they run from the police or why? I guess you know the answer. They just don't have any remorse because they learned that from childhood, like you said. Is that what it is?
well, for somebody who's antisocial, they're never going to learn a lesson. They just don't want to get caught. So that's their whole motive is just not to get caught. Um, so yeah, that's the thing. It's not they have remorse or they can be rehabilitated. They really can't be rehabilitated. Don Black, one of my colleagues at Iowa, he's an expert on sociopathy and written books on it and articles and extensive research. And um, I forget that he has a really fairly popular book. I think it's Bad Boys, Bad Men or something like that. It's a book about sociopathy in particular. So um, he's the expert, but he's a good colleague friend of mine. And but I've been around it a lot, so I know exactly what it looks like.
If you had to give a suggestion out in here, and then we'll talk about where you're going in the future with this. But if you had to give a suggestion to anyone out there, because I'm worldwide, that is judges or whoever, your opinion, your personal opinion on maybe someone who messes up and then they recover, because there are those out there, but someone who repeatedly do the same thing and get out and do the same thing and they end up under your care telling you, hey, look, y'all, you can give me medication, but when I get out, I'm not going to take that medication no more. What opinion would you give to that?
To the judge,
Yeah, about the
they're
inmate
probably
status.
not treatable. They're probably going to come back through again. We call that recidivism. Some people can be treated and they can be rehabilitated. I honestly believe that. Different states have different levels of that. Oregon at one point had a really good, and they may still do a really good program. So the recidivism rate was much, much less than, say, in Idaho, where their treatment has to do with getting behind bars, and just they had no real rehab, at least when I was working there. So you had a high recidivism rate. They didn't help them get the skills they needed to survive in society. You can't just open the door and walk out the door and you have no place to live and you have no job and you have no education and expect to have that person. And then they have a record, right? You got a felony. So who's going to hire them? Who's going to give them housing? who's going to give them a leg up? And so, that's the problem. There are people that we can save and we can provide, and they have a chance. I think involving forensic psychiatrists in the loop can help us identify who may be amenable and who may not be amenable, so we don't waste our time on people that are probably never gonna be treatable versus those we think have some hope. Um, I met somebody when I was in Mexico at a resort where we go who had quite the life story, and I always like to hear people's life story. And he was kicked out of his house when he was like, I don't know, 13 or 14 or 15. And he was homeless and living off the streets. And of course, at that point, had no resources. So he was in and out of jail, in and out of stuff. I don't know all the history there. And at age 27, after so many years, and all he had was a bag to his name, just a bag with some belongings in it. That was his extent of his belongings. He had nothing, no equity in anything. So at 27, he got hired by, I think, an uncle maybe to work as a roofer, right? Well, he can do that, or at least learn that. He started working as a roofer, and then they got the deal to roof his grandfather's house,
Mhm.
and the uncle just kind of decided he wasn't going to do it anymore, and they were going to just bail out on his grandfather. He says, "I'm not going to bail out my grandfather. We agreed to do his roof." So he ended up roofing his house, and then he ended up taking over the roofing company because the other guy just kind of basically bailed. He didn't want to do it anymore. So he took it over, and long story short, he became the largest roofing company in the state of Ohio. And now he's famous. He's a multi-millionaire. But you know what he's done with his money? And he's a former alcoholic himself. So he has formed these housing units where alcoholics can come to recover. They have to get a job, they have to work, and they can go there for a year as long as they can stay clean and sober. He's basically giving them a leg up because that's what happened to him. Someone gave him a little leg up, and now look at his life now. So I thought that was really cool. And he's kind of screening these people, making sure that they're ones he thinks he can help, that he thinks it can make a difference in. And he's grown. He's got stuff in Florida and Ohio, and he's just slowly growing this. And so I thought that was really a good solution. You know, a lot of drug and alcohol treatment has to do with people that are recovering. They want to help other people out, get through what they had to go through.
I feel like I'm kind of glad that I don't use hard drugs. I know I used to. However, I know that road and I don't want to ever go down that road again because it is a mind altering thing where it messes with your mind. And everybody that has been on that roller coaster, I've interviewed judges that was on methamphetamines. And however, everybody has, when you're on under zombie, what I call Operation Zombie Land, like a effect where they're like, well, I don't give a, you can finish the rest. And that's what most of them say. When you offer those drugs, you think clearer. And I see that Donald Trump is researching marijuana. And when I was in Seattle, like they had ashwagandha in brain helping chemicals in the marijuana to help advance and elevate your mind, where your brain chemistry, your cognitive chemistry is thinking more elevated. How do you feel about that advancement? And do you think that I don't want to put you in a situation where you think, well, Idaho should have marijuana. However, what I want to know is, how do you feel that marijuana could possibly help people by introducing brain enhancing chemicals or possible exotic brain enhancing chemicals that will help a typical person with their cognitive ways?
Well, let me start with the cannabis issue. Science is they research this stuff. It's not like it's a mystery. And science so far has only shown two benefits to cannabis: pain, that's why they like to use it for cancer, and for sleep. They haven't shown any other statistical benefits so far, research wise. Again, it's touted for all kinds of things. I do know that cannabis interferes with antidepressants and certain medicines that I use, because I've had patients on cannabis, and then when they went off, all of a sudden the clouds part and they're getting better. So, and it's also interfered with TMS. So I know that can be a hindrance. So you can't just have a blanket statement about it, whether it's good or bad, whether it should be
Fair enough.
legalized. I think for medical uses, it should be legalized. That's my opinion. But the problem is, that's a slippery slope. So how do you put the brakes on and control it? And pretty soon I've got a line down the street coming to my office trying to give me the medical reason they need this. And so it's a tricky little dance. I'm not for or against. I just want to make sure you know the science. We make decisions on scientific information rather than how people feel. Alcohol is legal, right? And alcohol has plenty of problems. So that's the argument is why can't we just legalize pot? So like I said, I can kind of see the argument both ways. So I don't have that massive opinion either way. I do know the downsides of both of them. I see the detrimental effect of both of them, but prohibition didn't work for alcohol. And criminalizing pot may not be the solution. But it's a tricky dance. So I just don't know. All I can do is speak to the facts of what we do know, and let society decide what they're willing to live with. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's a political thing to some degree. Scientists already have their opinions because we have data. We don't have to sit there and guess about it. Again, it's a question of it's going to be used, and it's common and popular. Should we criminalize it and put everybody in jail? Probably not. Where are the safeguards and where are not the safeguards? And that's always the challenge in society.
I know you've taken chemistry and well beyond chemistry. Like you said, you're very advanced. Last question. I have to ask this question. If a chemist is creating like a chemical base for, let's say, marijuana, let's say a scientist or however, and they decided to put or create a chemical like this is theoretically speaking, like let's just say methamphetamine. They could possibly do it and take out one chemical base that can cause that base to be possibly methamphetamine, but without that one chemical, it's under the borderline. Is that possible?
I couldn't really comment on that because I don't know. I don't follow that sort of thing too closely. I think the bottom line I try to tell people, and this is the thing I learned when I was at Iowa from Dr. George Winokur, was if we were starting to have an argument about a psychiatric condition or principle, his comeback was always show me the data. Because that's all that really matters. You can start to talk about, well, I heard this and that, and this must be true, and it was in the news, and show me the data. Because that's where the rubber meets the pavement. Because double-blind placebo-controlled trials are very powerful. So even, for instance, we talk about, microdosing and mushrooms and all that sort of thing. I just took a course on that sort of science in December. And the bottom line is there's not good data yet. And there's other problems because you can't just grow it like pharmaceutically perfect, where the doses are just right. Depends on the season, depends on the strain, depends on the variety, depends on the temperature, depends on all these conditions. It's really hard to make it easy to study because it's too unreliable. And so there's all these factors to make it really hard to say whether something does this or doesn't do that. Maybe in a few people it does, but there's a placebo effect as well. So how much is placebo and how much is actually doing a pharmaceutical or pharmacological effect? So you just have to learn to be careful about what we believe and what we see, and asking the question, show me the data, is pretty reasonable. That's kind of how I live. My book is all about evidence-based treatment. Even the psychotherapy is evidence-based. It's not just, oh, I think this is great. Well, if I think it's great, where's the science behind it? If these medicines are so great, what's the science behind it? If TMS is so great, what's the science behind it? So everything that I present is evidence-based only. I don't get into speculation and all kinds of strange things. Plenty of people do that, so they don't need me for that. I want people to read a book that they can say, okay, here's my guardrails. Here's what I can do, and this is reasonable. Science is behind this. Science isn't perfect. I'm not saying it is, but it's the best thing we have going when it comes to treatment, because double-blind placebo-controlled trials are still the gold standard today about what works and what doesn't work. And preliminary studies don't really count. Those are just for scientists to say, well, maybe we should investigate that. Let's do a double-blind study. And then they do the double-blind study, and maybe it shows it doesn't work at all. So we have to be careful about what we believe and not jump to conclusions.
Well said. We have 9 minutes left, and I wanted to
Okay.
know, um, based on your evidence, I have a app that I'm trying to get launched, and it has relevance to what you're saying in a court context, where what it does is it scans your eye. It scans your actual iris, and it can tell if you're inebriated. And it can tell by how many hours it takes for someone inebriated. Then I want to come out with a double whammy. Somebody that can check their own mental status in real time, that's kind of jumping it a little further based on them scanning the chemistry of your brain, because Facebook has this technology, and it's factual, where they can scan your heart and all of that, body temperature. So why not scan in real time using an app, something that can scan in real time your brain and tell you what is wrong with, and you continue to see a psychiatrist or you continue to see a psychologist, but personally, based on AI. Do you think that that possibly would be a future, or have y'all been mumbling about it or talking about stuff like that for the future to help people become more productive in society?
Well, that's a big question. In terms of scans, fMRIs may be the closest thing to what you're talking about. They show a detailed image of the brain, but they also show the metabolic state of the brain at a given moment. That's how TMS was that's how they found locations in the brain to treat TMS in the first place, was using fMRIs. And now they're using much more sophisticated imagery to combine images with other images and other technology, and starting to use 3D images of the brain. And but the more we can see the real functioning brain in real time, the actual living brain, the better. So I think that technology is happening. I think it's occurring and being developed. That's where I think we're going to see further advancements. I think it's going to combine that with genetics, because genetics is the blueprint for the brain and how it was put out to be in the first place. How it was architectured out, basically, as the DNA. So DNA can predict certain things about the brain structure and maybe how it functions. So I think there's just a lot to be done still, but I do think that some kind of brain scanning is always going to be evolving and changing.
Where you see yourself going in the future, and thank you so much.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
You're welcome. Where you see yourself going in the future
Where do I see
with.
myself going in the future? Myself?
Mhm.
Well, I'm in the twilight of my career, so I'm not going to be working too many more years. I'm going to use all the tools at hand to treat the people in front of me. I still am a working psychiatrist. I go in the hospital every day. I see anywhere from 10 to 20 people a day. I still have an office practice. I see people there. I also try to provide some wisdom to staff and people who, can maybe benefit from what my experience has been and all the years of doing this. So I try to convey what I know. And that's why I'm promoting my book, is I think it'll be helpful to society to understand all this much better.
Is there anything you would like to say to my audience before we close, other than what you just said? You have the floor. Anything you can.
Read my book, because that's really I can't say what better than what's in my book. I cannot say it here. I do think it's worthwhile. It's on Amazon. You'll have the links here with all that. There's 3 versions: paperback, Kindle, and an audio version. The audio version is amazing. I used a really professional narrator. It's really great to the ear. So that's the thing that you can do. And she has a link to my author website, which gives you my bio and background and stuff about the book. And this podcast will be posted there, as well as other stuff I do. I have upcoming events and book signings and stuff I got coming up. So that'll be a good way to and there's a place to email me on there too. If you decided you had another question or something, you could email me on that website. So, and I could steer you in a direction, hopefully.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you so much, Doctor. Stay on the line. Thank you guys for joining my show today. Take care, be safe, and I'll see you guys another time. Bye.